coming up on today's show?
Well, he said that's what he wanted. He said he didn't want a wallflower. He didn't want somebody who would hold back in any way.
Oh,
The best service I could be to him was to be brutally honest.
ah,
And that was a real life lesson about what it means to be a good manager and what it means to be a good leader. I mean, when you're working at the New York Times, there's sort of this assumption that you're going to be the paper of record and you're going to get it right on the first bounce. Is doing a lot on artificial intelligence and remote sensing, and working on basically how you take all this cool satellite data and get it into the hands of African farmers on small farms, and help them develop and grow crops and manage weather disasters and all that type of stuff. How you use behavioral interventions and social norms to achieve policy outcomes that you cannot otherwise achieve with laws or with market forces. She calls it soft power. How you take these initiatives that don't have the force of law and don't have market power, but how do you still achieve the pro-social outcomes that you want?
Hi there, I'm April Paige, breaking down the what, when, where, and how creatives get their inspiration. I'm a big fan of the cursey words, and I've been a creative for 30 plus years in marketing and fine art. This is where creatives unite to break down the facts of creative life. Buckle up, let's get lost in the world of creativity together.
welcome everyone to Artist Antics with April, where we talk to creatives about creativity. And today I'm excited to sit down to talk to ghostwriter, cookbook author, and poet and musician, Joe O'Keefe, and originally from Biloxi, Mississippi, currently in Durham, North Carolina, where I'm at. And Joe's primarily a ghostwriter who writes speeches, opinion pieces, book proposals, mostly for CEOs who specialize in issues related to developing countries in Africa and recently artificial intelligence and behavioral science. And he was a reporter for local newspapers in Mississippi and Louisiana, then editor for the New York Times, Foreign Affairs magazine, and later speech writing for the Secretary of Defense, World Bank, and State Department. And he was also an editor within the Clinton White House administration. Do I have that right?
Yes.
For a joint investigation by the CIA, FBI, and DIA into espionage with the U.S. Department of Energy related to nuclear weapons design. I'm so curious. A writer of his he's also a writer of his family cookbooks, Cooking on the Coast, Cooking on the Coast Revised, and then Kids Coloring Vegetarian Cookbook, which I also have questions about, and poetry and songwriter, those were his first loves. He returned to poetry 3 years ago, I think that's correct, and moved to North Carolina. When he moved to North Carolina, that's when he picked poetry back up, and he has over 100 poems posted. And welcome, Joe. Oh my goodness.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I don't know if I merit all of those titles and accolades, but I've definitely been a jack of all trades.
I can see that.
A finger and a toe.
All I thought when I read it was, holy cow, this guy does everything.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I do any of them well, but I have done all of them to some extent. So
yeah, no, but you're seeking, so that's great.
It's been
so
fun.
I'd like to start at the beginning. I want to start with ghost writing first, because and then we'll go from there. But in ghostwriting, in writing in general, whether it's songs or poems or ghostwriting, I mean, where did you get the love of writing? I love to hear those stories, whether it was a family member or a teacher or, something you picked up when you were a child. I just love to hear like where the spark came from.
Right. Well, in my case, it goes back to, I would say, my family of origin. I come from a huge Irish Catholic family, 12 brothers and sisters.
Holy cow.
And that presented quite a lot of drama on any given day, and a lot of conflicting viewpoints, and a lot of stories, a lot of storytelling storytelling, and a lot of just trying to make sense of the world when you have all of these people in close proximity who have very strongly held views
Yeah.
about different topics. And there was an overlay on top of that. If that were not enough drama, which I think, 13 kids should be enough drama, but fully half to 2/3 of my family, my siblings, would be characterized today as neurodivergent. And so there were a lot of minor dramas and subdramas associated with that, whether or not you're talking about addictions or alcoholism,
Right.
or issues like bipolar. And so those things were going on at the same time. And we're also a very political family. I had my father was in political office. My brothers, one of my brothers was in political office.
I
So
see.
there were a lot of debates all the time about public issues, and so writing was my way to kind of make
Express
sense of it
yourself.
all and
Yeah, yeah.
process everything.
Yep.
It really started in a very personal way, with journals and poetry, and I didn't even realize I had any facility for it until I got pretty high up in high school and in college, when people started to say, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. You might be onto something."
Yeah, that's really amazing. No, it's funny you say that because, I'm a pretty opinionated woman myself. And my grandfather used to challenge me at the dinner table when I happened to have dinner there. There was a small time when my mom and I lived with them, but he used to challenge me and say, pick a current event topic and challenge me to have an opinion about it.
Yeah, yeah,
So I couldn't not have an opinion about it. So
yeah,
and I
yeah.
had to, express why I thought what I thought. And, I didn't know too much about all the current events, so depending on which one he chose, I might not know anything, and then I would ask, questions prior and be like, "Okay, but I need some information first because I don't know anything about it."
Right, right.
So that he would tell me in general, and then I would work it out. But, he would do little things like that to challenge me, and I think it's just, great that, your voice came through from trying to get through all of those children.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great exercise because,
Yeah.
unless you read the daily newspaper and kept up with what was going on, you
Mhm.
really couldn't keep up with the conversation around the dinner table.
Yeah.
And so there was the normal family drama. There was all of these exceptional cases, people who had their personal issues, and then there was the politics on top of it. So
Wow.
it made for a very rich narrative environment.
Yeah.
And my father was always regaling us with the stories behind the stories, that,
Mm.
well, this is what's happening in the headlines or what you're reading in the paper, but let me tell you the real story behind what so and so said, or the real
Yeah.
reason they're doing something. And so it just made for a lot, if you're a, 9, 10, 11-year-old kid, it's just like a lot of fastballs coming by you and a lot to figure out. It was a great intellectual training ground.
Yeah, for sure. That's wonderful. Well, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense as to, where you went in the trajectory of your career. And speaking of that, so take us through like what it was like from the trajectory itself, like when you started as a editor or reporter in Mississippi and then went to editor at New York Times.
Yeah, yeah.
Like how did all of that happen? And I'm sure there's, steps in between, but in general, how did that happen, and what came to all of that? How did all that come
Right.
about? Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of happenstance and improvising. When I graduated from high school, the assumption was that I would go to work in the family business, which is the funeral home business. In fact, all my
Mm.
brothers and some of my sisters had gone to work in the funeral home business or the family insurance business. And so that was just the assumption. And I decided late in my college career that I wanted to try my hand at something having to do with a creative field, probably writing, but I wasn't even sure what that would look like. I had never worked on the school newspaper, had never published anything. And when I got out of Spring Hill College, this would have been 1984, I started knocking around looking for something to do. And after a lot of rejection slips, I wound up at a tiny, tiny newspaper, probably the tiniest conceivable newspaper. It was in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and it was basically a one-person weekly newspaper.
Oh, how funny.
I had to do all the research, all the reporting, all the writing, all the editing, all the photography. And then at the end of the week, I had to drive over to a separate shop and do the actual layout.
Oh my gosh.
Backs of the newspaper.
That's old school.
It was definitely old school. And I have to confess, I was really bad at it. I was really, really bad at it. When I started out, I had no experience on school newspapers. I had no experience reporting. But man, what great experience just to be thrown into the deep end. I mean, they basically said, you're hired on Monday, pay stuff for the newspaper is on Thursday. See you then. Go get some news. And I didn't know anything. And so the first couple of years were pretty miserable and a learning process. But I did learn a lot. I moved on into a daily newspaper back in Mississippi and got into covering politics there. Wound up covering the state legislature and the governor's races and congressional campaigns and all of those issues. And that was a great education too, in a different way. And that was sort of my introduction. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I had no plans of being a speechwriter, but when you cover a legislature, you have to listen to speeches nonstop, like 4 or 5 hours a day.
Right.
So that was great training to see and listen to different speaking styles and people use their voices in different ways and different idioms and figures of speech and cadence and all of those things. So I had at the time a notion, I kind of fell in love with writing columns. So I went to graduate school with the idea that I would be better off if I could round out my education in things like economics and political philosophy and those types of things. And that was sort of my game plan, to go to graduate school, to come out as a columnist. While I was in graduate school, I completely lucked out. And someone told me about that there was a slot on the New York Times editorial page. And they said, what are you doing this summer? And I said, I don't know. I think I'm playing basketball or something. And they said, well, you should apply for this.
Oh my God.
And so I applied. I went and it was for an internship.
There you
go. On the editorial page. And I went in there and I bombed. I bombed big time. I mean, I was everything, the flop sweat and losing my place in the middle of sentences and everything. Right. It was a disaster.
And they hired you anyway?
Well, the interview was with the columnist who was the predecessor of Tom Friedman. His name was Les Gelb at the time, the foreign affairs columnist. And so I went home and I wrote him a nice letter and I said, I'm so appreciative of the opportunity. It's a beautiful spring day to interview, but man, did I bomb. I completely prepared in the wrong way. You caught me flat-footed with questions, but it's all good. Have a nice life.
Right.
A nice life. And then I got a call back from his assistant like a week later, and he said, Les thought about it, and he thinks you're right, actually, that he took the interview in a direction that wasn't really fair to you.
Oh,
because I had prepared on all sorts of foreign policy issues. He wanted me to do a diagnosis of his columns.
oh, geez.
And that's what he had asked me for, and I was unprepared. And so he said, I'll give you a second chance, and you need to write a critique of my columns. And so I wrote a critique of his columns. One, I gave him high fives. One, I said, I like the concept, but the execution could have been better. And on the third one, I just completely flayed him. I said, this is a bad idea, bad concept, bad execution, bad prose, bad ending. This is
My
just a
God.
complete fail. And again, I thought, he's always rejected me once. He's probably going to reject me again. So I had nothing to lose.
Right.
And so
Might as well be honest.
yeah. So lo and behold, he hired me as his intern
Oh my gosh,
on the
that's
editorial
funny.
page of the New York
Wait, but what
Times.
did he say about your critique?
Well, he said that's what he wanted. He said he didn't want a wallflower. He didn't want somebody who would hold back in any way.
Oh.
The best service I could be to him was to be brutally honest.
Ah.
And that was a real life lesson about what it means to be a good manager and what it means to be a good leader, to
Yeah.
surround yourself with people who will be candid with you.
Yes. No,
Uh,
that's a good tip for everybody who's listening to us. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
yeah. So I did a year there, and then and while I was there, I freelanced some columns onto the science page, which I absolutely enjoyed. I couldn't get onto the Times full time. I desperately wanted to get on there as a full time reporter, but it just wasn't in the cards. So I wound up at Foreign Affairs magazine as an editor, as an associate editor there. And I was there, I guess, 3.5, 4 years, again, doing foreign policy and international affairs, which was a big deal for me. I mean, I was a small town kid out of Mississippi, had
Yeah.
been covering local politics. I had really never had this big game plan to be thinking about what's happening at the State Department or, nuclear weapons and all that jazz. And just kind of, one happenstance led to another, and there I was. And that led to the speechwriting gigs in international affairs, national
Gotcha.
security, and all of that.
So how did working with such high pressure, all I think about is the high pressure, high stakes of it all, right? And
Yeah.
in those environments, how did it influence your writing style when you were trying to understand what was going on in all the different audiences? I mean, that had to be really stressful.
Yeah, I mean, when you're working at the New York Times, there's sort of this assumption that you're going to be the paper of record and you're going to get it right on the first bounce.
Mhm.
And that is a very high bar. You spend a lot of time making, checking, double checking, and triple checking to make sure you've got your facts correct, and also that they're in the correct context and you're not misleading people with the context.
Do they have fact checkers behind you?
Well, as an intern, you are the de facto fact checker.
Got it.
You have a little bit more flexibility if you're working on the opinion page,
Mhm.
because a lot of just in terms of the quantity of the prose that you're putting out there, a lot of it is opinion rather than reporting. So you don't have to do quite so much primary source digging.
Yep.
There's a lot of thinking through and analysis of what other people are writing. But there's some fresh reporting and original reporting too. But it's a great life lesson. It really forces you at every turn to say, okay, as much as I would like to put a thumb on the scale, and shade this a little bit this way or that way, you're better off in the end hewing as close to the truth as you can,
Right.
even if the truth is qualified and messy and complicated and doesn't
Right.
necessarily help your case that much. You're so much better qualifying it and living with that than trying to make everything neat and simplified.
Yeah, no, and then if you try to put any opinion or color on it, then you're gonna get stuck in something eventually. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, for
exactly,
sure. Yeah,
exactly.
and so that your style, did it evolve, as you were learning some of these new things that you were doing, as a, higher level, writer? Like, in editing, in your other roles too, I mean, with the investigation, that had to be something, to talk about too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, I would say my style evolved from horrible to passable. I
Well,
grew
you
up
must have been doing something right.
I guess something right. I grew up as a huge fan of people with very florid writing styles, and so I loved H.L. Mencken. I loved
Mm,
Mark Twain. I loved writers who really had all sorts of convoluted styles
yeah,
and tortured analogies and everything. And I was very much in that mold coming out of college. Reading a lot of Norman Mailer and Truman Capote and different ones like that. It was very kind of a novelistic style. And what I had to do over the years is basically wean myself off of that and go
yeah,
and learn to live with a much leaner style, a much more spare writing style, but one that was still hopefully, accurate and credible and enjoyable for people to read. But it's something that I still struggled with on the investigative piece that you're talking about. There was a lot of tension in this. It was a kind of a working group. And there was a tension between the people who said this needs to be a lawyerly document. It almost needs to read like a congressional record type of statement, very officious and very dry, and people who said, no, this, you really need to rip the bark off of this and use very strong language, very colorful language to get people's attention. And so I was caught between these two.
yeah. I mean, you have to work with building rapport, establishing trust, right? And,
Right.
and I have a problem with this in marketing. I'm a senior marketer, so sometimes, there's two diabolically
Right.
polar opposite, opinion
Exactly. Exactly.
project done. And, yeah, I just wonder, like, how does that dynamic affect your writing or your writing process?
Well, it depends on sort of where it happens, and it teaches you a lot actually about conflict resolution. I was a speechwriter at the Pentagon when I moved down to Washington, D.C. for the Secretary of Defense there. And there would always be these big speeches coming up, sort of like the Munich speech that got so much press earlier this year. There would be these big
Yep.
keynote speeches where people would expect that, the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State, whomever it was going to come out and really lay out U.S. policy. And a lot of times, U.S. policy is in flux. And within the Pentagon, it's in flux, and there's a lot of conflict between the different services. The Army may have one view, the Marines may have one view, the Navy, the Air Force another. And so the Office of the Secretary of Defense, they would say, go find out what the building thinks. And what the building thinks was a euphemism was to go to every service, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, Coast Guard, on down the line, and find out what their policy position was, and then bring them all back to the Secretary of Defense, come up with a negotiated compromise solution, or in some cases, go back and you get to be the messenger telling people that they're going to get what they asked for, they're not going to get what they asked for. And so that was a fascinating process of, just seeing how policy is made, but also on how
Yeah.
conflicts get resolved and how sometimes they need to be resolved above your pay grade. When it's an issue of style, as it was with the investigative report, then it's almost there was really a constituency of one there, and that was the Senator Warren Rudman, who headed up the project. And he said he wanted it to be colorful. He wanted it to be really grabby. And at the end, the consensus was that it had been a success. And I forget the exact quote they said, but because Joe added some Tabasco. Added some Tabasco to the recipe. That's right. And I was like, well, yeah, I only did what you told me to do. You know, if you wanted less Tabasco, I would have given you less Tabasco. But that was a fascinating project to work on.
I could talk to you about this for like 8 more hours, so I'm going to move on because we have other topics.
Yeah.
But well, actually, one more thing before we move on from this. Behavioral science, you know, I know you're kind of dipping your toe into that and are trying with AI and development work there. How did bringing behavioral science insights to the narratives you create, particularly in speeches or opinion pieces aimed at influencing policymakers and business leaders, how do you deal with that? Like, do you, anyway.
Yeah, so these are different clients I have with sort of distinct portfolios. So one of my clients is doing a lot on artificial intelligence and remote sensing, and working on basically how you take all this cool satellite data and get it into the hands of African farmers on small farms, and help them develop and grow crops and manage weather disasters and all that type of stuff. That's one client. Another client I have is interested in how you use behavioral interventions and social norms to achieve policy outcomes that you cannot otherwise achieve with laws or with market forces. And so just to give you an example, suppose you wanted to address alcohol abuse and the side effects of alcohol abuse, and you wanted to do it without using the lever of government or without using market forces. One model was the model of, you may remember from the 1980s, the DARE campaign, which was this big push to, you know, basically change the entire worldview of how kids thought about drugs, and just say no to drugs, just say no to alcohol, and salute your police officer, and turn your parents in if you see them smoking a joint. And it was a very comprehensive attempt to change the social norms of teenagers. About the same time, there was a separate experiment sort of with social norms, and that was the designated driver campaign. And the designated driver campaign had a much more focused approach. They focused on beginning to change the narrative in television shows and commercials, and to begin salting in this idea of saying, wink, wink, we know you're going to drive, we know you're going to drink, but if you're going to do that, at least designate a sober driver.
Yeah.
Not an entirely sober driver, at least the one who's the most sober in the group.
Right. I mean, we talk about that amongst my friends all the time. Every time we go out, who's DD today? You know,
that's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, it's part of our lingo. Yeah.
That's right. And so it turned out that DARE was not especially successful in all the after action, sociological analysis they did. It just did not seem to have much of an effect. Designated driver, on the other hand, really changed the norm in this nation and has probably been responsible for saving, I don't know, tens of thousands of lives since it was instituted. It existed nowhere. If you go back into the dictionary before, say, 1983, the term designated driver did not even exist in the dictionary. until that time. This was an entirely new initiative that,
Right.
they were able to get the Hollywood screenwriters on board. And so I have a client who's very interested in, she calls it soft power, how you take these initiatives that don't have the force of law and don't have market power, but how do you still achieve the pro-social outcomes that you want? And so there are other examples like,
Right.
getting people to stop smoking or getting
Right.
people to improve their
All
health.
the bad things.
Yeah, or to stop domestic abuse,
Yeah.
or, to do better in terms of climate change interventions. So there are a lot of ways in which it's applicable, but it really gets down at the end of the day to behavioral science.
Mm.
How do you get a small group of people to say, hey, it's okay, it's cool to give my car keys to somebody and call them the designated driver?
Yeah.
That's a behavioral intervention.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of fun learning about that. It's a very
Yeah, no,
complex
you're piquing my
topic,
interest. I wanna
multifaceted.
know more, but I'm afraid we're gonna run out of time.
Yeah, yeah. The book proposal is out there. We're getting ready to take it to publishers actually this week.
Wow,
Yeah, so we're excited
awesome.
about that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. We'll have to, when this comes out, I'll, have to link, if you have that by then, have to link the, book, to purchase.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully we'll
And
have the name of a publisher by then.
yeah, perfect. So, okay, let's transition into family cookbooks first. I want to talk about
Yeah.
that. We have our own family cookbook,
Oh,
and
great.
each one of us put a recipe or two in there. And it's my family's Cuban, but
Nice, nice.
we have, obviously some of the grandmother and great grandmother recipes in there, but then my aunts and my mom and I and my cousins, we wanted it to be a little bit of us too. So, like, for example, I do a yellow curry and I put that in there. But
Nice.
so how did you, like, talk to me about why you created the family cookbook and how
Yeah.
did that come about and what
Yeah,
what
yeah.
brought that
It
about? Yeah.
it had been an ambition of my mother's for decades, and she would just always muse out loud about it, saying, I'd love to write a cookbook. We have so many recipes across the extended family, and ones that have been handed down, handwritten, that are floating around. I would love to preserve those for posterity. And so, when I got to Foreign Affairs magazine, I learned desktop publishing. And so I told my mom, I said, okay, let's just go for it. You send me everything. You just send me all your recipes in an envelope, a shoebox, I don't care, whatever. Just send it to me and I will go ahead and lay it out and we'll make this like a little cookbook. So we worked on that. We got different siblings to contribute recipes, and I Xeroxed the thing out, and it was nice and tidy and everything. And I sent her a copy, and she called me up and she said, "Oh, honey, thank you. I really appreciate this, but we have had a big miscommunication." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "I don't think you understand. I want to see my cookbook for sale in the store." She said,
He's
"I
like,
want everything."
you got more work to do, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. She said, "I want a glossy cover. I want the little barcode on the back.
Oh,
I
that's
want
awesome.
I want people to have endorsement blurbs on the cover and everything." And so we spent another 9 months. We got the local bishop to endorse it. We got
Oh
a
my
seafood
god.
captain to endorse it. And one of the things that made it a lot of fun is, in addition to the recipes, we layered in family photographs and we
Oh,
layered
yeah.
in family stories
Yeah.
about the recipes. And so people would have reflections on, I remember we always used to cook this dish on such and such a holiday, or there was a recipe in there for fudge, and it was the fudge that my mother sent to my father when he was over fighting World War II, and he was
Right.
by Okinawa. There was a love letter saying, "Dear,
Aw.
your great fudge arrived in the mail today," and So we had that next to the fudge recipe, and so it was just a really nice keepsake. And then about 10 years went by, and the younger generation decided they wanted to get into the game too. And so
Yep,
we revised version and expanded it and put a whole new bunch of recipes in there. So we have two editions of it now.
that's awesome. I wanna get one, so we'll have
Cooking
to
on
put
the
that link
coast.
in the description, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do that too. So, what types of food? I mean, I assume it's Southern, but I don't wanna make that assumption. I'd like to hear.
Yeah, it's primarily there's a small little neck of the Gulf Coast and South Mississippi right there that is actually culturally more like New Orleans, which is to
Mm,
say you have a lot of French Catholic, a lot of Spanish Catholic, a lot of Irish Catholic. So the cuisine is mostly New Orleans type of cuisine.
mm.
You have lots of
Now I'm really gonna get
gumbo's,
it.
etouffees,
Yeah.
crawfish bisque, oysters Rockefeller, all
Mm,
that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, we had some of those classic deep South dishes like fried chicken and collard greens and
got it.
that type of stuff. But
Oh,
mostly
amazing.
it's New Orleans, a lot of seafood recipes.
Yeah, awesome. Can't wait to get it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how did this children's no, let me back up and ask, why a vegetarian, coloring book for kids?
Well, we have such a big extended family. We have now 91
Oh,
nieces and nephews
my gosh.
between the first generation of grandchildren and then the great grandchildren. And so when you have that many people, you have just about every conceivable profession and every conceivable political ideology and
Oh, I'm sure.
persuasion. So
Yeah.
we have some very conservative evangelicals, people who are conservative with a big C and a small c. We have some very liberal people, some very from free spirits and all of that. We have lots of different occupations from, lawyers and doctors and everything in between, and people who run retail and run the funeral home. So one of my nieces, she is a nutritionist. And so she had always had the idea, she's always been into a very healthy eating lifestyle
Mhm.
and wanting to make sure that her kids had healthy options. We have a big family reunion coming up, and we were talking about things to put in the welcome bag, the swag bag.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to put a little piece of pottery in there that's made by one of my nephews. We're going to put some poetry in there from me and from my niece, who's the nutritionist. We're going to put in her vegan or vegetarian cookbook for kids. It's a
Awesome.
vegetarian coloring cookbook. Um, and actually, I have a copy right here.
Sure.
I'll grab it and show you.
Yeah. We'll put the link in the description for that too, so no worries there.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So here it is.
cool.
Uh,
Got it.
colorful option. What is it? Colorful
Choices?
choices. Colorful
Yeah,
choices.
that's
Um,
awesome.
and yeah, it's just just 24 pages of coloring book with healthy recipes. So
Yeah, no,
uh,
that's great.
it was a fun
Uh,
little project.
yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, what you probably have to, rent out a whole hotel to house you guys. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, we're expecting somewhere between 150 and 200
Oh
people.
my gosh, I can't even imagine. That's like a wedding.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well, we joked that you have to have we've gotten to the point where we need an app to keep up with everybody's
for
name.
sure, for sure. That's awesome. Wow. Well, that's a blessing in and of itself to have so many people and family around you. So, yeah.
It is, and it's a great life lesson. I mean, you have to, everybody has to get along come time for Thanksgiving dinner, and learn how to, you know,
Yep.
mix it up and treat people in a respectful way, regardless of whether, they're Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, whatever the case may be. So,
Yes. Amen to that. I think more people should lay down the politics for family time. But
yeah. Yeah.
So many stories we could get into about that. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'd like to shift to your poetry, if I may.
Yeah.
When and how did you become a poet? What was the spark for that? I mean, I know you said when you moved here 3 years ago, I think you picked it up again, but it sounds like you did it previous to that too. So,
Yeah, I started in high school writing really bad poetry, doggerel verse, and I wish I could be a tree and all of that type of
yeah,
stuff. And I kind of set it all down when I went into journalism and editing and speech writing. Although, some of the high formal speeches, like there have been times where I had to write, for instance, a speech at for Arlington Cemetery. And in cases like that, there are poetic touches that you want to add in, and beautiful turns of phrase. So I've
yeah,
always had a love for it. I always knew that I would come back to it. And just the stars aligned with my amount of professional flexibility over the last 2 or 3 years that I've been able to return to it and having a whale of a time. I'm really just loving it, writing about all sorts of topics that I never would have guessed 10 or 15 years ago, much less
yeah.
30 years ago.
So, having said that, how do you pick your topics? Like, is it just something you observe or something that hits you, a feeling? Like, explain that to us. Like, where, and how do you get your inspiration for any given poem?
Well, I guess there are a couple of interlocking layers to it. One is just as almost genetically, I love wordplay. And so
Mm,
all day long, 7 days a week, as I'm just walking around, driving around, I am the rock tumbler is turning and I'm playing with phrases and words and
yeah.
lines and analogies and metaphors. There's that. And then you add into that your life experience, which in my case, I'm the youngest of the siblings in this huge family. And we're now at a point where the older of the siblings are beginning to pass away.
Mm,
And I've lost both my parents now. And so I've been doing a lot of reflecting on the arc of life and thinking about meaning of life choices,
mm,
and the meaning of life in the largest sense. Classic life issues like forgiveness and redemption and
mm,
regrets and things like that. So
yeah.
that's a big sort of stream. And then I'm fascinated just on a recurring basis about the what I would call the fragility and the contingency of life,
Mm,
and how so much of what happens to us is either completely by chance or by random, or that you just barely survive something, or life could have turned out in such a different way.
it's true.
When I was 16, I was deckhand on a shrimp boat, and the boat was struck by lightning
Mm,
in the middle of Gulf of Mexico. I was about 7 feet from the mast that was hit by lightning and scared the heck out of me.
oh, I'm sure.
And but I always think, geez, a couple of feet in another direction and I would be a goner.
Yeah.
I've counted up over the years and I've had something like 7 close brushes with death, like that, barely missed by a speeding car or,
Yeah, I've had a couple of those myself. I think most people have those moments, I would think, in life where, weird stuff happens and you come close. I had a I had a truck in a on a street in Tampa when I lived in Tampa, Florida, and it hit the manhole cover oh so perfectly, and the thing flipped up in the air and came flying at my car, and
oh my
I
goodness.
am telling you, I pulled over, I was shaking so bad. I don't know how it didn't hit my car, but
Just
if it was, like, 4 inches lower, that would have been bad day for me,
This
so
life flashing before your eyes.
Yeah, no, I pulled over and I called my boss and I was like, "I need a second. Holy crap, I almost died just now," you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah,
And
there's
those are such powerful moments.
yeah, yeah.
And so I've always been fascinated by that.
Mhm.
Not only the big intentional decisions, but these small little twists of fate that make such a big difference. And the fact that, I mean, I guess a recurring theme is that I feel like we should all be much more grateful and much more humble about pretty much everything,
Mm.
and have so much humility, because there but for the grace, we could all be in such worse circumstances. We could be the person who's disabled, the person who did not walk away from the wreck, whatever the case may be. So that's been a big theme for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like the one, that struck me in particular, the illusion of being free, and,
Oh, right, right.
I think it suggests, and I'm just asking since you're the writer,
Yeah,
um, and I know people see different things from, my paintings, what different poems, whatever,
right.
it's not necessarily what you intended, so I love to hear, but I wanted to tell you what I got out of it just to hear
Yeah,
what
yeah. I would love
you're
that.
and so, I think it suggests that in the absence of clear guidance, maybe like with the broken cup, the knife, the broken compass, there's a meaning to be found in like some of these directional things that, made me ponder if you're embarking on a journey,
Right.
one of uncertainty maybe or discovery or potential sacrifice, whatever you wanna call it. I kinda got all of that out of there.
Yeah,
But,
yeah,
what you would hope to find on the way, and might you be willing to give up or invest in the journey what you would be willing to give up or invest in the journey.
yeah.
And, the journey is life basically, but am I close?
Yes, 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 absolutely, absolutely. And, I one of the ways that I think about it is in, how people have this innate propensity, to construct narratives. We give ourselves a lot of credit for having agency or being in control of our decisions. We have this illusion that we have all of this freedom, when in fact, so much of who we are and what we're about, is has some heavy steering currents in terms of just
Yeah, well, I call it
society.
programming. I call
That's
it
right.
programming from society, from governments, from families, from friends. It's,
That's
from
right.
schools. It's
That's right.
it's programming. You're filled with all this programming when you get here. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And with even with your life experiences, your traumas, what you embody, in terms of what inspires you, what scares you, all of those things. So we always walk around with this illusion of being free, when in fact we're being guided by dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of stories, other
mm,
people's stories and our own stories. And then we go out and we find partial pieces of information, a shard of a coffee cup, a piece of a compass, a lost map. And that's also partial information, but we just have this innate drive to create a story around those things
right.
too. And those stories impel us forward. And it's both one of the most endearing and inspiring and hopeful things about humans. It's also one of the most weird and irrational and wacky and crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
we just
It's
we
a
just
double-edged sword, just like with anything else.
yes, yes, yes. We
Yeah.
all on such thin evidence are always creating these stories and making decisions and taking actions on just the smallest pieces of evidence. So that's what I was reaching for with that poem that
Interesting.
we're caught somewhere between the illusion of being really free and the illusion of not having any control. And in between, we have all of this storytelling going on, and we're trying to
Right.
figure out whether or not we're a stowaway on this ship or whether or not, we're the author of this adventure.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it's something to ponder, isn't it? Because I feel, I don't know how, I mean, based on your poem, it's making me think about, I really feel like we are left to make our choices in this little box
right, right,
that they
exactly.
that we're in. And they're like, knock yourself out, make all the choices you want in this little
Yeah,
box. Because, we all have to work and we all have to go to school and, we all have to take care of the house and kids and
right.
animals or whatever. So, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think a lot of that is taken away from us. I could talk to you forever because I would love to go down the path of, the Industrial Revolution and that programming and what it's
Yeah.
done to us as far as, schooling and
I'm
politics
I'm
and
utterly fascinated by this contradiction between how much humans think they know and how
yeah,
much we actually know. And the more you learn, you realize what a
I don't know
tiny,
much.
tiny, tiny little sliver.
I say that all the time, isn't that funny?
Yeah,
I say, I usually say, "Look, and I learned something today," and then I say, "I know enough to be dangerous. I really don't know much,
right,
about a lot
right.
of things." So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the more you learn, the more you realize that, what goes in your brain is maybe an eyedropper next to the
yes,
ocean.
the whole,
So much
iceberg
out there.
concept, yeah,
And
the little teeny part is sticking out, and the rest of it,
yeah,
you just have no idea.
that's
Well,
right.
and I am a very, very big nerd and look into, quantum physics
Oh,
too, so
yeah, yeah,
I'm trying to figure out reality, not just from what we're talking about, politics and
that's
schooling and
right.
all the arts, etc., but just from a reality standpoint, like what is this that we're living in? So,
Well, exactly. And one of the things that fascinates me a lot is, and we've only discovered this in our generation, and that is dark matter. Uh,
mm,
and we now know that dark matter takes up something like 90% of the known universe, and we can't explain it. We don't know what
no,
it is, and it's like, oh, how arrogant we are that we think it's a
yes,
big deal to go to the moon or maybe even, whoa, Mars.
yeah,
Like 90% of the universe we can't even explain.
yes.
It's dark
Well, yeah,
matter.
you're
You know,
right, and then you get into string theory and then all the other dimensions and that some of them are
that's
going
right.
on simultaneously, that'll just fry your brain.
That's
I just
right.
like,
That's right.
it's stuff that I don't even know that we can conceptualize as human beings. Like, I don't know that our brain can manage what is actually going on, you know?
And I love that. I just love exploring those contradictions,
Mm,
and that space. And I've thought a lot about sort of the progression of intellectual history about, gee, what did they know at the time when they were trying to create Stonehenge, And they thought they knew a lot about the way the world worked. And we
yeah.
look back and think they knew pretty much nothing. Well, 1,000 years from now, they're going to be looking back and saying, well, those bozos in
Yeah, they didn't know what they were
25,
doing at
they
all.
didn't know what in the hell they were doing. They
Yeah.
still, they still believe 90% of the universe was dark matter. How stupid
Yeah,
could you be?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's
I
funny.
love that. I love that about the human condition that,
Yeah. Well,
I,
there's always gonna be paradigm shifts, right? So the next one, and that leads me into my last question for you is about
yeah,
AI. I'm asking everybody about it, their thoughts on AI. I
yeah,
have my thoughts, and I don't wanna color my thoughts with yours, but
sure.
I just love to hear, in general, what do you think about the use of AI? Is it good, it's bad? Where do you think it's going? Stuff like that.
Well, I think that it's going to, at a structural level, it is going to change the structure of the global economy, of the U.S. economy as one of the most advanced nations. I think it is going to wipe out a big chunk of jobs, and there are going to be some dislocations. And that concerns me because we've already seen several waves of dislocations because of technological advances. So that's something to be concerned about. I am concerned about what's called the alignment problem, that once you create these autonomous agents, that without sufficient human oversight, you could have some runaway chat bots or agents or bots that do things that you don't want them to do. I am less concerned about some sort of super singularity brain taking over
Yeah.
the entire world, because I still see that computers have to be plugged into the wall.
Yeah.
And if things get too out of
Out of
hand,
hand.
just
Yeah. We're not going to have a
unplug
limit.
them,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is not to say that there is not going to be a lot of field or a lot of leeway for mayhem. There will be, but I don't believe that we're going to have robot overlords.
Yeah.
On the narrow, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you before you move on, like about the guardrails. I'm
Yeah,
very interested in that because I watched a few podcasts and listened to some of the guys who actually created it. The cat's out of the bag. So it's in its infancy. And I feel like we don't know what this baby is going to grow up to be, right?
yeah,
It's training itself, to your point, but also to your point, if it's training itself in ways we don't want it to train itself, it might just go there because it has the option to and doesn't
yeah,
know that it's not a good decision for the humankind. So
right, right,
um that concerns me that there's no, and it's not even a moral thing, it's more of a just, we have to put guardrails on this, right?
yeah,
And they've already said it's too late because the cat is out. So
right, right,
um and it's already, being worked in so many different ways, but I just I wonder if there's any way to police that, besides policing ourselves. I think that AI will have a dark AI, just like there's a dark web.
right, right,
But and we don't know what that's going to be yet, but I know that for sure will come. But
right, right.
I'm just curious, do you think there's a way to put guardrails on this? Because I don't see that there is. Like, unless we police ourselves, which, you can't count on actual humans, not every human anyway, to police
Right.
themselves. I just wonder if it's even possible to put guardrails on the thing.
Well, it depends on which domain you're talking about. And
Mhm.
so there is sort of one domain that I would say is kind of the social domain and public debates and social media platforms and things like that, whether or not there's going to be disinformation. And I think there will be kind of a mixed bag. You're going to have some institutions that come forward and do a really good job of ground truthing information, ground truthing there, and maybe even a better job of putting out factual information and being held to a higher standard. At the same time, you're going to have a lot of disinformation out there
Yeah.
polluting the public square. I think in some domains it will be opaque. Like I'm not particularly thrilled that there are probably, I don't know, 1,000 healthcare companies that can get my health data at this point,
Yeah.
one way or another. And I just don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know who's getting this data, who's not getting
Yeah, and data is the currency of our time in my
it.
mind,
Exactly.
and there's over 2,000 data points on any given person. I just worked for a data company for 3 years.
Yeah.
I used to purchase their data to fill my customer data holes.
Yeah. It's amazing how much you can find out about anybody.
Mhm.
And so I think the public square is changing, and AI will have a big impact on that. But I think you're going to see a differential impact. I think there will be some domains where there will be good governance, and things will be pretty tightly controlled. And I think there'll be some domains where it's just wide open, the wild, wild west, and people can do anything they want. And there's still a lot of shakeout right now. The English major in me, the humanist in me, hopes that this results in a renewed interest in ethics and philosophy, and those types of things, because a lot of the people who are going to need to govern these systems are going to have pretty good moral compasses, and they're going to
Yeah.
have to know how to think through these issues.
Right, and you have to think ahead of what the things that you don't even know are coming. That's the hard part, that they have to be general enough and specific enough to handle, whatever's coming and whatever we have now.
There's
And
just a fascinating case just today. Somebody published a map, and I don't know how accurate it is, but it is a map of the location of every Tesla dealership, every Tesla charging station, and every Tesla owner.
ooh,
Now, that's certainly technically possible. It's
yeah.
feasible if you think about the information that the DMVs have, and
Did it come from Tesla?
and that Tesla puts out, and different ones. It's
Yeah.
possible they've basically doxed the entire Tesla industry. And so you have to ask yourself a question. Wow, doesn't that like change your analysis of what is politically feasible or right or doable? Or do we even want to live in a world where every time we have a policy disagreement, that all of a sudden, Nabisco is going to have all of its Nabisco plants published, or, Budweiser, or whatever the case may be, that we can dox anybody?
I know the government's working on it. They approached, the company I was working for, and they are on a policy creating data hunt. They want to know what it is, where it's coming from, how we're using it, what's being distributed, how it's being, I mean, every aspect of it.
Right,
And
right,
which I think is great. They're reaching out to all the major data providers, and I think they're trying to put some policy around it.
right,
So, yeah. So, I'm glad to hear they're working on it. I don't know how long that'll take, but
right,
and who
right,
knows with the change of guard, if that's even something that's going on, because that was last year. So I don't know if it's still going on because I don't work there anymore. But
right, right.
yeah.
On the narrower question that you asked about the impact of AI, in terms of how it might impact creatives, I'm a little bit more sanguine on that. I think at the end of the day, it's a tool, and that if you use the tool creatively, people will appreciate that. And if you use the tool in a disingenuous way, people will find you out.
Yeah.
And I think there are all different levels of creativity. We don't give James Cameron credit for every single aspect of Avatar.
Yeah.
And we won't give writers maybe every credit for every single aspect of their plots. So I think a lot of that will be up to the integrity of the individual artist to
Mm.
disclose, how much they leaned on AI versus how much they didn't.
Yeah, and there's art that's being created now through AI, and I'm fine with that as long as it's stated and they
Right.
know that what they're purchasing is an AI created piece. I'm fine with that, because
Yeah.
I am in the belief that the human touch, the handmade things that we consider art, I don't think that's ever going to go away, because a or at least not yet, a computer. let me let me say this for posterity. Um,
Right. This will show up in the time capsule.
yeah.
April said it first.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't I don't think that it'll get to the point where it can have feelings and weave in, culture, pop culture, and,
Right.
how things connect with each other, and, the history of, the resistance between different cultures or groups or whatever, I mean, yes, it could learn some of that, but the nuance to create something beautiful, I don't think so,
Yeah. That's right.
So,
That's right.
I think just like, the TV, replaced radio, the internet, when we started doing email, replaced snail mail,
Yeah.
this is just another tool that we can use, and I fully embrace it as a marketer,
Yeah.
full transparency, I use it every day.
Yeah.
And but I never use it as is. It just starts me, and, it's all about the prompts. You have to know what to ask it to get it
That's
out,
right.
what you need and want. And
That's
even
right.
when I kind of modify the prompts, even then I don't get what I want. So,
Right.
a lot of times I'm just like, ugh, forget it. I'll just do it myself. But
Yeah, and like, I will not use AI to write a poem,
yeah.
but I will use AI to do research about, say, dark matter if
Hmm.
I'm interested in using a dark matter reference in my poem.
Right.
So it's just, and I feel like that's fair game. I mean,
Yeah. No, I think it's just a more efficient way of Googling in my mind.
yeah, a lot of
Um,
it is, a lot of it
yeah,
is.
for
Um,
sure.
so
Well,
fun
thank you.
stuff.
Yeah, my gosh, I didn't think we'd go down that road. That was great.
Yeah, yeah, and
Um,
so much, yeah, so many things we could still touch on. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. We might have to have a part 2. Thank you so much for your time today. For everybody listening, we'll put all the information in the description for Joe. And if you need to get a hold of him or, have other questions and buy his book and all the things. So we'll put that in there. Thank you so much for your time today. I really
Right.
appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Lots of
Yeah,
fun.
me too.
Thank you.
If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Feel free to nominate yourself or someone you know as our next guest. Thank you for being a part of our creative community. Stay inspired and keep shining bright.